So the first question, and the one that we saw sort of embedded in a lot of the questions that we looked at, were what qualifies someone to be considered a refugee?
All right, I'm going to pass that down the row. Dawn. That's me. It is you?
I'm Tom McNally. I'm Daniel and Libby's grandfather. What qualifies someone to be a refugee? A general definition of a refugee is someone who is trying to escape harm or persecution. So a refugee is someone who is seeking refuge. The modern legal definitions for a refugee have kind of emerged after World War I and World War II. Someone qualifies as being a refugee if, and second, they are unable or unwilling to return due to a well-founded fear of persecution. That persecution can take many forms. It could be based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. The international rules around refugees and how we treat them were devised in the Geneva Refugee Convention, and the U.S. is a part of that agreement. And it outlines the minimum standards for the treatment of refugees, and that includes the right to housing, to work, and to education, so that while they're displaced, they can lead a dignified and independent life. So people become refugees by making the decision to leave their homes, their families, and their communities to find sanctuary in another country. This is a decision by desperate people who feel they have no other choice. There have been refugees as long as there's been communities of people. Many prominent figures in the Bible lived as refugees or were forced to flee their homes due to famine, persecution, or danger. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph fled to Egypt to escape King Herod's order to kill all the young boys in Bethlehem. Abraham left Ur for Canaan and temporarily lived as a foreigner in Egypt due to famine. Jacob and his family fled to Egypt because of famine and eventually settled there as immigrants. Moses fled Egypt after killing an Egyptian and lived as a refugee in Midian. Ruth, Naomi, and Elimelech migrated to Moab to escape famine in Judah, and Ruth herself was an immigrant in Israel. David sought asylum multiple times while fleeing King Saul's persecution, and Elijah lived as a refugee due to political persecution after he criticized the king. These stories have helped shape many of the Bible's teachings on compassion and justice for strangers and displaced people.
Thank you. How are refugees handled and processed in the United States system?
Hi. Hello. Good morning. I'm Dawn Peterson. One needs to physically be outside of the country, and they need to be referred by an organization, and it's the U.S. Refugee Assistance Program that processes the refugees. As you can imagine, it's quite a process. It could be anywhere from 1.5 years to 2 years. There are security checks, interviews, and medical screenings. So the government admits refugees based on, as Tom mentioned, persecution risk and other priorities. They also will determine the total number of refugees that come in, and there's also regional allocations that are set each year. So again, they're admitted based on the situation of their country of origin, and the number of admitted per year. Some of the countries that we've seen that have been heavily admitting refugees in recent years, it would be Syria, the Dominican Republic of the Congo, Afghanistan, Venezuela, Iraq, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. The refugee can become or can apply for a permanent residency after being in the U.S. for 1 year, and they would receive a green card. And it's after at least 5 years of being a resident that you can apply for naturalization. And this I did not know. This has been the law since the Naturalization Act of 1790. And it's how many of generations of immigrants have come to become citizens.
Thank you. So we heard in both of your answers 2 different terms, and the next question sort of addresses that. What is an asylum seeker, and how does the process of admittance different from that of a refugee?
I'm Rhonda McNally, and I'm married to Tom, and raised our kids here in this church, so we were longtime members a while ago here. Brianne and Kevin we raised here, and so I am also Nona to Libby and Daniel. It's good to be here, very good to be here. First of all, I wanted to say asylum seekers are persons who are applying to be granted legal protection here in the United States because, again, similar to refugees, they have been persecuted or fear persecution in their home country. The main difference between a refugee being admitted to our country and an asylum seeker obtaining asylum is that asylum seekers are persons that are already present within the United States borders. Or the other way that someone can become an asylum seeker is if they are presenting at the border, one of our borders, and request asylum, or if they are apprehended and request asylum at that time. I just have to say that the immigration system is very complex, and it has taken me a long time to understand it. I do have notes. I don't expect to be able to do this by recall because it is complex, so I'd like to just say, to affirm that for all refugees and asylum seekers, it's a difficult process. For the asylum seekers, there are several types of persecution. They qualify by having experienced persecution or having a fear of persecution. The same types of persecution that already have been mentioned by Tom and by Dawn, so I won't go over those. But all persons who are seeking asylum must make a formal application that includes presenting evidence. They have to present evidence to our government that they have indeed suffered persecution in their home country, or they have to have a very well-founded fear that they can show of returning to their home country. The application process is definitely a long and tedious application. It's lengthy, and it is in some ways traumatic for asylum seekers to complete because they have to give in great detail what has happened to them in their own countries. There's also an interview, which imagine that, having to go through an interview and reliving the experiences that they've experienced. As of July 2025, there's a backlog in our country of 2,245,000 asylum cases that have been filed and are awaiting asylum decisions. So you can see that it may take months to years for these applications to be actually processed and either approved or denied. The individuals are considered asylum seekers while they're awaiting this decision. And having a pending asylum response is supposed to provide some protection for them from deportation. If their asylum request is processed and approved, then they become asylees. That's the terminology that's used once it's been approved. And then they can gain the right to apply for a green card and have a path to citizenship, as Dawn mentioned, as refugees have. But this entire process from asylum application to an approval to green card can take, as you heard, many, many years. So then the next complication is, how are some of the legal statuses for refugees connected to asylum seeking? There are a couple of temporary refugee statuses that do not provide a pathway to citizenship, as Dawn explained, of those refugees that come through a refugee resettlement organization. So they can't apply for a green card without making a change in what their status, their temporary status is. So probably the best way to understand this, if I share an example of a family that Thrive knows and have been providing support and care for. These are currently asylum seekers. They are from Afghanistan. They arrived in the US last year in 2024 with a legal status as refugees. They were granted a temporary legal status to enter the US, so they're here legally. But the key word here is temporary. Their status is called humanitarian parole. It is temporary. Their parole status is only valid for 2 years, and it is not one of those statuses that gives them a pathway to citizenship. The father of this family worked for the Afghan army, which fought alongside our US military, our US Army, against the Taliban. So he was part of the resistance to the Taliban. When the Taliban gained control of the government in 2021, the Taliban continued to search for, persecute, and kill people who fought against them, such as members of the Afghan army and any Afghan who actually worked for the US Army. While many Afghanistans who were in that situation were able to evacuate in the evacuations of 2021, there were many, many persons, such as this family, who did not get out of the country, who were continuing to be in great danger of great harm. So now what's next for this family? Their legal status of humanitarian parole does expire in 18 months, so they will lose their legal status for being here. But so their goal when they arrived here, with a lot of support from their sponsor and other individuals and an immigration attorney, was to apply for asylum while they still have their humanitarian parole status. And then they can, if they get asylum, then they can proceed to a path of citizenship. So they are now one of those over 2 million people in the United States with a pending asylum case. There's a wrinkle in that. The United States government has now declared that some of the temporary statuses may, for Afghanistan and some other countries, may be rescinded, and they may be sent back. Families could be sent back to Afghanistan. That is what our United States government is currently feeling. They feel that Afghanistan is now a safe enough country under the Taliban rule. But many people do not agree with this, and there's currently a bill pending Congress called the Afghan Adjustment Act that's co-sponsored by some congressional veterans and some other veteran organizations. The bill notes that because of these individuals who are here with temporary status, because of their loyalty to the United States military, that they should be considered as allies and should not be, and that we have a moral obligation to support them and help them to remain in our country. Also, they do not believe that they will be safe if they are returned to Afghanistan. So there are ways that people can support this bill. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer that after the service. So that's just an example of one refugee family that was legally admitted to our country, but now needs to seek another pathway to be able to safely remain in the United States. Again, the immigration system, I feel, is very, very complex, and it's very difficult for me to wrap my head around. So I have great empathy for anyone who is experiencing the need to immigrate or to be in our country.
how does THRIVE strive to follow biblical teachings in relation to refugees and asylum seekers?
Good morning. My name is Pauline Spring. Most of you know who I am, but I'm glad to be back here amongst all my friends and family, really, here at NHCBC. I think the best way to begin is to let you know what our mission statement is. Our mission statement is practicing hospitality by connecting newly arrived immigrants and refugees via e-sourcing with neighbors in the Pittsburgh community, helping them to feel welcomed, become independent, be cared for, while demonstrating the love of God for each individual. So the key words in there: hospitality, connection, welcome, independence, care, love of God. Those are really the key attributes. And I'm wondering, you're probably wondering, how do we achieve those goals in what we do? Beginning in 2018, which is when we really started getting our wheels moving, THRIVE began its work by offering refugees in Pittsburgh through various refugee agencies items of welcome to refugees who had just arrived at Pittsburgh International Airport. We offered to support the work of the refugee agencies by just simply providing the families with simple things like hygiene kits, cinch bags of fun and essential items for the kids, warm handmade blankets by members of our church and others. And as time went on, we began to offer items, for example, for the kitchen, because they were often in hotel rooms for weeks on end, because they couldn't find apartments for them. We delivered, and when they did get apartments, we've even delivered entirely furnished an entire apartment, and we continue to do that today. But as time went on, we also started our Supper Club program. As some of you have attended those, we empower refugee cooks to help support their families. And on September 28th, we're going to have Roxana have her Supper Club at McKnight United Methodist Church. So we hope you'll join us for that on September 28th. And that initiative has grown to, really given refugees a lot of opportunity to increase their economic potential and chances for success. However, a recent key executive order has significantly reduced refugees' admittance through the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services Office, or USCIS. This agency in the government manages lawful immigration and handles applications for green cards, work visas, and naturalizations. The refugee program has been indefinitely suspended, halting new applications and canceling travel for thousands of approved refugees from their endangered circumstances. It has brought refugee resettlement to a near standstill. This means less refugees coming to Pittsburgh and no federal funding to support those that are already here. The federal government had previously supported refugees for 90 days to help them get on their feet, and in partnership with the refugee agencies, in order that they could get into a home, an apartment, rental apartment usually, cash needs, public transportation, medical assistance, job training, employment, ESL instruction, and immigration services. All funding has been pulled from the agencies for these supports, and agencies have had to reduce their staffing by 50%. So for that reason, THRIVE has also had to significantly change how we achieve our mission in 2025 and how we're going to effectively minister to refugees and asylum seekers. So we're shifting away from meeting immediate material needs and providing welcome to long-term needs and supports for the refugees that are already here. So we now focus solely on how we can help our previous clients become independent and provide the extra assistance that the agencies originally did provide but can't now because of these cuts. And that type of help can take many forms: transportation to work and to the doctor, assistance with Indeed.com and filling out job applications, school and college registrations, researching where to get reduced or free dental work, because that's not included in any Medicaid services, teaching how to use the bus and a bus pass, help with registering for the Greater Pittsburgh Food Bank Network, financial assistance for requiring medical appointments, financial assistance for required medical appointments in order just to get the green card is $500 a person for that. Purchasing a used bicycle for transportation, or even a small freezer for a family of 11 that needed a little bit of help with food storage. So we've also continued our furniture ministry, recently just delivering a dining room table and chairs and bed frames to a family who was eating on the blanket on the floor and sleeping on the floor. Finding a better apartment, help with legal paperwork, and even helping an illiterate man understand how to pay his bills online and apply for utility assistance. One woman told me recently, "Dear," and that's a typical Syrian way to address a friend, "I'm so glad we met you," meaning Thrive. "You have helped us so much. You are a good friend to us." Refugees generally need a lot of guidance in navigating the American way of life, and it takes more than 90 days, that's 3 months, it really takes years for a refugee and his or her family to get settled in and begin to really like they're assimilating into their new country and culture. And the more welcoming Americans that they meet and interact with, the better and faster they will assimilate. Just like all of our own ancestors, they had a coming to America story, and there were ups and downs I'm sure they experienced along the way, and those ups were made more joyful and those downs were made more bearable when they had new friends that came along the way and said, "I am here." And in Arabic, that is "ana huna." And it means, in other words, you're not alone, and we welcome and support you. Thrive Pittsburgh tries to do that thanks to our donors and through our volunteers and initiatives. We strive to do what Jesus has asked us to do, to love the stranger among us in tangible ways. And as we remember that our ancestors, or perhaps even we, were all once strangers in a strange land. To finish up, I'd like to give you a few ideas as to how you can support refugees. Caden, can you put the slides up? Thank you. So some of the ways you can help us are by donating your older car. Refugees often have to save for years to be able to get a car. And that is one way that they can get to work and get their family where they need to be. 2, to teach how to drive or pass a driver's test.
Parallel parking.
Yes, Felicia. We have firsthand experience on parallel parking with Felicia. Yes. Number 3, to be an ESL tutor or a tutor, after-school tutor for children. 4, to drive moms or kids to appointments. While dad is at work, they are often without transportation. And if you want to take a bus to a health center, it could take you 2 hours each way to get to your appointment. So that can be pretty daunting, takes up most of your day. To become a family to become a family partner. You can become somebody who sort of checks in on folks and on a regular basis to see what they need, or to meet with them. Become a friend. Volunteer at a supper club. Okay, it's really a fun time and it's easy to do, and we're always looking for volunteers to help with things like that. Sponsor a fundraiser for Thrive, and there's a lot of different ways that can be done. And finally, just be a partner with us. You've been a partner with us since 2018, and we want to thank you, NHCBC, for your prayers, for your donations, and for your partnership through these last 5 years, actually almost 7 years now. And on the last slide, Caden, these are some of the other folks that we work with as partners. ISAC, which is a Immigrant and Services and Connections agency through Jewish Family Community Services. And SHIM, which is the South Hills version of the North Hills Community Outreach. Literacy Pittsburgh, which obviously is involved with literacy and ESL classes and so forth. The Sisters of Divine Providence, right down the street here. And also the Working for Justice group from St. Paul's United Methodist Church. And the Olive Branch, which is we're having an event with them next week, next Saturday, that you can participate in. They're our most recent one. So, but thank you. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you and to share what we're doing and to thank you for your support.
Would you join me? Thank you so much for your time, for your stories, for your information, for helping us to see and to hear and to feel this more Christ-likely. Thank you so much. Friends, would you stand and join us in worship as we reflect on how God's love has welcomed us?